The expert's paradox is like the reason why this shit is hard. And it's why you can sit and talk to Claude for 4 hours, or in some of the, like my client's case, months and months of conversations trying to figure out their messaging and not feeling like they're getting anywhere. Because that offhand, flippant thing that they say that nobody catches is the brilliance, and they just dismiss it.
Hey, welcome to the Rare Mind Podcast, where I, Alex M.H. Smith, the author of No Bullshit Strategy, explore the uncommon behaviours and outlier ways of thinking that produce outlier results. Where knowledge and expertise, as they are converging around this best practice sludge. What you've got here is the high leverage antidote. And today is a special episode for solo businesses and thought leaders with a woman who has the exact prescription that you need to stand out in that space. So I hope that you enjoy it.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined today by Katelyn Bourgoin. Why don't you just give people a little bit of your background and what you're up to now, because it's some interesting stuff.
I would say that background initially started as back in an agency life. Started a branding agency and really had no business starting one. Ended up building that up to about an 8-person team, working with some pretty cool clients. Got restless, decided, hey, you know what's not cool? Selling time for money. Maybe I should just start a tech company. How hard can that be? Turns out very fucking hard. Like
Many such cases.
yeah. Yeah, it looks so great from the outside. Inside, like, it's hard. But, managed to bootstrap it to the point where we were, featured in Forbes. They were calling us the next LinkedIn for women, got some venture capital, built the team. I was a non-technical solo founder. It was real hard. And from the outside, it looked great. Inside, everything was not working. We did not build a sticky product. People would come and not stay around. So within a few years, ended up having to close that company, go bankrupt. And decided, what am I going to be when I grow up? And luckily for me, I had built this incredible network of startup founders, and my VC had their portfolio of companies. They came to me and they were like, hey, we've got all these great companies that are building these like game-changing technologies, most of them technical founders. They have clients like NASA and Tesla, and yet they can't actually get people to buy their thing. And so I was like, all right, like I'll go work with them. If you're going to pay the bill, I need money desperately. So let's do this. And I would sit down at the table with all of these really freaking brilliant people. And I'd ask them the question that we need to understand as marketers, which is, tell me about your customers. Like, why are they choosing you? And nobody could give me a straight answer. And that led me down this rabbit hole of like, why is that such a hard question? Why are so many people struggling to answer that? And I became obsessed with customer discovery, found Jobs to Be Done, Bob and West and Clayton Christensen's work, mind blown, and eventually found my way to buyer psychology. And that's kind of where I hung my hat for the last 5 years. What are the kind of principles of the way that people pay attention and get persuaded, and how can we teach people those? Because if they understand those, creating content becomes infinitely easier. Um, and so built that, and from that, saw this thing that kind of became clearer and clearer to me, which is that the people who were really popping off and building meaningful businesses and being seen as thought leaders, people like yourself, they figured out this thing, which was they figured out how to be known for something hyper specific, and they committed to it enough to get that. And I was like, why isn't that happening more often? And that became my new obsession. So now I help people find their ownable idea, and that's kind of the mental territory that they can plant their flag, become known for, and if they do it right, it'll sound like an echo coming from anyone else, and it will spread beyond them. So that's the work today. So long journey to get here.
What jumped out to me about your ownable idea is that I feel like that industry has evolved very, very rapidly. It went from nobody doing it to there being this huge window of opportunity where lots of people piled in and had quite an easy time of it. And, I was perhaps, part of that pile in, maybe on the sort of latter end of it. But now that everybody's trying to do it, it feels to me like the drawbridge has gone up. And to actually build a reputation online as a solo person has become harder than ever. Hard to the point where I personally almost look at it now, and I'm obviously being slightly facetious when I say this isn't totally true, but I sort of think if you're starting now, don't bother.
Mm.
But I do think that your ownable idea angle on it is one of the few remaining ways that a person can actually still start to get still start to build leverage and a reputation in that game. But before we talk about the ownable idea, what do you think about that? My sort of intuition that there
I
was a
think
moment in time and it's passed.
I would disagree with that. I would say there's a moment in time for every channel, right?
Mm.
And what's changed from what used to exist to today is that, of course, content creation has never been easier. There's a real anxiety in the world around becoming a thought leader, building distribution. There's a big narrative out there that distribution is the moat. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to have distribution. What that essentially translates to is means like you need to be able to get your message out into the world. And one of the best ways to do that is to be the voice of that message and build your own thought leadership around it. So I think there's a lot of people who are feeling anxiety, feeling like they need to pile on, and watching some other folks in the space talk about how easy it is to create content now, just use my tool, blah, blah, blah. And so I do think that, yes, there's absolutely more content than ever. I feel like there's moments where what Gary Vee used to call underpriced attention. There's moments on platforms when they're still picking up steam, where growth feels easier. You joined on LinkedIn, and as did I, at a time where there wasn't a lot of great content on LinkedIn. Creating content was really hard. And I think that it was much easier to grow on that channel when we were there. And so the question becomes not necessarily that don't even bother. I think that it's absolutely harder than it used to be. And anybody who tells you that it's not harder on LinkedIn is, not putting time there. But there's, the old saying goes like, when's the best time to plant a tree? Like, 10 years ago, the next best time is now. It's not going to get any easier. And ultimately, when it's still important, my belief, though, to echo what you've said, and think obviously this is self-serving, so people can poke holes all in it. But I think that what used to work before, I look at people who were great thinkers and could translate that thinking into great content. And they didn't necessarily need to be as dogmatic about like really nailing one concept and being known for one thing because there was just a lot less noise. And now those people create that great content, and somebody who's hired a ghostwriter goes off and steals that great content, and they run it through AI and they change a few words, and then somebody else is posting it, and suddenly everybody starts to sound the same. And so I do think that the opportunity is around really zeroing in on a perspective that you have on the problem that you solve for customers and coming up with something that feels revelatory and different and fresh and just digging your heels in and being willing to repeat it over and over. And that's where a lot of people fall off. They just don't have the conviction. And so I think that was it easier to grow before, kind of falling into this like broader category? People would see you maybe as like the email marketer. That was what you were known for. Yeah.
Mm.
But now that every single email marketer is standing up on their soapbox and screaming as loudly as they can, and they can create 100 posts in 10 minutes, whether they're good or not is the other question. But there's just a lot more noise. You need something more than just the category. You need something that's stickier than that can travel farther than that. And I think that the ownable idea, it was always it was always kind of the shortcut. If you could find that thing, you could break through faster. Like obviously Justin Welsh found it, but I think now it's not just a shortcut, but it's a must have if you really want to have a meaningful breakthrough.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, it's funny because it could seem from the outside a bit like it's self-serving and I'm selling I'm selling a hammer, so here's a nail kind
100%.
of thing. But I really don't think it is that. People are often I often get, people asking, sort of solo consultancy type people asking me for advice and coming at it from a different angle to you. I'm completely aligned because I think that I look at my own content that I put out there. Now, back in the day, you could put out content that was very sort of how-to-ish, like, so,
And
how
people
to
still
do
want that. Yeah.
how to do a strategy, or like how to do email
Mhm.
marketing. I think that even if we ignore the crazy increase in volume um of content out there that's come up, I think we also have to consider that just AI, rightly or wrongly, has basically taken up the bandwidth for how do I do something? Tell me what strategy is. Tell me the basics of email marketing. So like 3 or 4 years ago, like, you didn't really have a good way of sort of like gaining just generic understanding of these things. But now
Mhm,
AI can make you a generic expert in everything. So if you're
mhm.
trying to then build this reputation, the onus is on you essentially to not be a generic peddler of that. If you're the best email marketing expert in the whole world, unfortunately, people are going to assume that your email marketing knowledge is no better than AI's is, because these are generic concepts. But
Yeah.
but if you have a
Yes, and but can I
personal, oh, go on, yeah, go on, yeah,
like,
pull
because
it
here's
apart.
the thing, I think that you're hitting on something that I think is actually also a big opportunity, because you're absolutely right that people don't know what they don't know. You know, the
Yes.
Dunning-Kruger effect, like, we all
Hmm.
think that we know a lot until we actually try to go deep on a subject and realize how little we know. And that I think that the fact that AI can kind of, like, make us an armchair expert fast is actually, again, a big opportunity for personal brands, because it's something from the behavioral science world called the messenger effect, which is the effectiveness of a message is tied to the messenger. So you might get an output from AI that is not dissimilar than something that, let's say, you know, Joanna Weeb, the conversion copywriter, she coined the category. She's worked with all the biggest brands. Like, she might give you similar advice, but when you hear it from her, you're probably going to believe it more. You're going to be more likely to act on it. You associate the success that she's had in copywriting, and that kind of is imbued into the message. So I do think when we want to build our own thought leadership, we need to be comfortable. And I know as a folks in the UK struggle with this more. We need to be comfortable with tooting our own horn, sharing our successes, and showing our hard-earned, like, understanding, because that's part of what differentiates us. Yeah, if you just look like another person sharing email marketing tips, and I don't have a reason to believe that you have status, credibility, all of that, I'm gonna think AI is the same. So we it forces
Mm.
us as experts to have to show our shit more, show the depth of our thinking more, and then people recognize, "Oh, this is actually much more nuanced than what I just got from AI."
Quickly, if you're enjoying this and you want to get the full thinking blueprint that sits under basically all of these ideas, then you're going to want to grab a copy of my book, No Bullshit Strategy. I'd like to say that you can pick it up wherever you get your books, but let's be real, you're probably just going to go to Amazon, and that is all fine because it is on there too, obviously. Two of my favourite reviews are one where a professor from USC said that she'd made it required reading for all of her students, quite right too, and another where a guy called it a spiritual masterpiece masquerading as a book on strategy. Now that is obviously the kind of praise I'm here for, so if you're curious what the hell he was on about, then go and check it out.
It's really interesting that you think that. I hope that you're right, and I think you could well be right. My much more sort of doomer-ish perspective is that when people hire experts like copywriters or whatever they might be, uh, they have an itch that they need to scratch, and they've somehow convinced themselves, "Oh, my landing page isn't great," or something like this, and they're looking around, and the only way they can scratch that itch is by hiring someone. And so they do that and they scratch the itch, and whether that person does a good job or a bad job is kind of incidental to the fact that they got that monkey off their back. What AI is really good at, unfortunately, is scratching these itches and therefore deflating the demand for that
Mhm,
thing. So if that
mhm.
person goes and has a session with Claude, like, whether or not they actually get to where they want to go, they've kind of they've let the air out of the balloon, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, you know what? I probably don't really need to hire someone." And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of opportunity that vanishes that we don't notice that it's vanished because it never even entered the market in the first place. We obviously don't know the briefs that never sort of materialized. But if so, what you're relying on, which this happens to me, so why shouldn't it happen to other people? What you're relying on is the customer, the client, the AI user having the what's the word, the well, let's say the wisdom to question what's being fed to them by AI. Do people do that? Do they do that?
They will. I think that you just hit the thing that they need to have the wisdom to question it. So let's just say that they're lucky enough to follow you, and whether they've just watched one of your YouTube videos or they've read something you posted on LinkedIn, and you have this particular perspective. You've shared this lens, this nuanced take that makes them think, "Oh, that's different." And then they go, "Well, I'm just gonna go into Claude, because that's the one du jour, and I'm going to ask about I want a strategy, like, what can one of the things you talk about is, like, effective strategies come with sacrifice. I remember the first time I heard you say that, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." Like, I hadn't thought about it that way before, but when he shows it, it's like, that's so clear, and they go to, like, Claude and they go, "Okay, I wanna come up with a strategy. My business is like, I've got this copywriting business. Like, what can I sacrifice?" Like, they're gonna get answers that feel meh. Like, because they're not gonna like, as long as you've created that awareness in them that makes them learn, that makes them wanna do something differently, when it comes down to time when they look at the output from Claude, I think they're gonna be disappointed. I think they're gonna say, "This doesn't scratch that itch." Because I think one of the things that we do as individuals, everyone talks about taste and judgment being the new mode. Taste is built through reps. Reps is pattern recognition. Reps is like this like algorithm we're running in our brains when we look at a problem that allows us to see it from a specific lens. And if you can get good at articulating that in your content, I think people will then trust you more than the AI output. One way I'm strategically trying to do this in my own business is that I ask myself, like, what am I willing to sacrifice? And I looked at ownable ideas as a concept, what makes it challenging to find one, and how can I ensure that people feel like they should work with an outsider to get this perspective, because I do
Yes.
believe that there's an enormous amount of value that comes from that. But then I went and I looked at like, well, what does the science actually say? Like, why is it so hard to figure this shit out on our own? Like, and I found all of these biases that make it hard. And then I was like, okay, there's the expert's paradox, which is a coined problem that I'm talking about now. It's kind of like the enemy. And I'm like, the expert's paradox is like the reason why this shit is hard. And it's why you can sit and talk to Claude for 4 hours, or in some of the, like my client's case, months and months of conversations trying to figure out their messaging and not feeling like they're getting anywhere. Because that offhand, flippant thing that they say that nobody catches is the brilliance, and they just dismiss it. And so if I can raise awareness of that problem, then they go, "Oh, well, I'm actually not gonna be able to solve this by brainstorming my way through with Claude. It's not getting me the progress that I want." So I think part of the goal of the creator, I think, in the sense of the entrepreneur, is recognizing where people are likely to get stuck and generating awareness around that so that they can see the hollowness
Mm.
that would come from other solutions.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. So we talked on one level there then about, which to be fair is something that I think I've been really underestimating, the value of credibility in the messenger, even if you are just a completely generic expert in your field. So then the ownable idea is obviously another layer above this where, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, like you're not just a generic expert in the field of whatever it is, but
Mhm.
you have a unique perspective and point of view on that field that is owned by you, that you become known for. And I would venture, if you would agree, that now in particular, this is effectively the only way that you are really going to reliably be able to get cut through in in that field. So instead of talking about, for sake of argument, just I talk about email marketing, it's going to be very hard starting from scratch to get anywhere with that. You then
Mhm.
need to have this ownable idea about email marketing, and then
Yep.
that is the thing that is going to put you over the edge. Is that the thesis?
Absolutely. And so I feel terrible that I'm blanking on his name, but it'll come to me after a call and I'll feel bad. But somebody who is a friend of mine, like, an internet friend, we've had a few calls. He is an email marketing guy. And he
Yeah.
had a breakthrough moment with his ownable idea. And he found this thing that he calls money moments. And the revelation was like that all these people are spending all of this time on crafting these kind of generic email sequences and drip funnels and things. But if you can identify the money moment, like what's the moment where that something happens? He specifically works with SaaS products. What's the moment where something happens, where they get the point of value or where there's some type of friction where it's the perfect time to send that sequence or it's the perfect time to send that email. And if you can identify those, you can be so much more targeted with your emails. And so he learned this from pattern recognition, right? From working with many different companies over the years, identifying that this was this trend. There were these specific moments. And if you could target them, so he coined it. He started talking about money moments. Suddenly, his DMs are full of clients looking to hire him. He has case studies showing where he's actually doing the work inside of companies, helping them to employ, like, find those moments and activate them. Suddenly, he's not the generic email marketing for SaaS guy. He's the money moments guy. And money moments is brilliant language, right? Because part of making an ownable idea spread is not just coming up with that central argument that you can repeat over and over, but it's shaping it into something people want to hear. And you hear money moments and you immediately lean in and you're like, what's that? That sounds interesting, right? And so I think for us, yes, it's something that it's always the sharp idea could cut through is always true. I think it's really now a default that you have to aim for. I also this is going to piss some people off and I'm just going to say it. The reality is that s- the effectiveness of your ownable idea is again going to come down to your credibility, your lens. Do people have a reason to believe you? This person had worked with so many different SaaS companies that we know. He created value for them. When he tells me there are money moments hidden in your email funnel, I'm going to listen. When somebody who just decided last week like, that they want to be an email marketer because they took a course and now they think email marketing is the next big thing. When they say it, it's not gonna be as effective, which is why one of the things that we teach and that we work with our clients is, like, how can we help them find a lens where we can shape that their experience is letting them see something and that we can show why they're trustworthy, and oftentimes that means not necessarily going head to head with other folks in that space that are just better known or just using something similar because you're not going to win. Like I remember a brilliant person who was creating great content on the surface that went through Unignorable was using solopreneur as like his there was an aspect of solopreneur in his thing. I'm like, who's going to choose you over Justin? Like why try to make that the thing you're known for? Like it's just there's so many other ways that and his content was good, and he had good consistency, and I was like, "This is not the territory that you want to own because it's just gonna be a bloodbath," right? Like,
Yes. Yeah,
you're
definitely.
just sounding like an echo. You need to say something different.
But on the subject of things that will piss people off, in addition to the credibility, like, well, in my experience, like we could say that you need to have an ownable idea, but in my experience, most people, being real, they don't actually have, even if they're deep experts on a
Okay.
subject, they don't actually have any particularly original or interesting insights or thoughts about it. And now, from my perspective, this is just, well, bad luck, because I would say, by definition, not everybody can be a world-leading name in their field, and not everybody can have an ownable idea, because it is, by definition, it's an elitist practice. Like in the world of leadership gurus, Simon Sinek, there aren't 1,000 Simon Sineks, there's one Simon Sinek, right? So obviously there aren't going to be that many people who can do this. So I would look at it and I would say that, like, can you really pull an ownable idea out of the average expert practitioner's head?
I've been thinking a lot about this question because you posed this to me before, and I I have a fundamental belief that I think everyone does have one. I think that they have one. I think that we as a society have conditioned people not to question things. So when a
Mhm.
fleeting moment goes by where they are looking at the best practices in their industry and they see them being, they see behind the curtain and they're like, I don't think that's right. They go, well, I must be thinking about this wrong, or I mustn't understand because these people have so much more experience and therefore, like, obviously they're right. Like, and so I was thinking about this. I think that at the end of the day, part of the work that I'm going to need to do, and it's funny because I was thinking about you because I'm going to be writing this post. I'd read your book prior to going to meet Neil O'Grady, who is my co-founder in the Unignorable Challenge for the first time. We'd run the thing virtually. We hadn't met in person. And one of the things that you pushed for in the book, if I'm remembering this correctly, was to have like, can you explain your strategy in a line, right? Can you have like a one line that actually explains what you're trying to do? Because if you can compress it down to that, then you have something people can buy into. And so I started looking at what we were really doing with Unignorable and where people were really struggling. And it was never really in the tactical stuff. Like you can learn to write like hooky
Yeah.
hooks. Like that's all doable. Where most people struggled was the confidence and conviction to actually put themselves out there and risk having somebody disagree, risk having somebody saying, well, why should I believe you? Risk the kind of like the social fear of judgment. And so I'd written this one-liner that I shared with Neil and Justin when I got to, um, California, where we were meeting, and it was like, what we're actually building at Unignorable, the original Unignorable Challenge, we're building a confidence factory. Like, if we start thinking about it that
Hmm.
way, instead of thinking we're here to help you build an audience or we're here to help you build a personal brand, like, if we actually think, "No, if we're a confidence factory, how does that change what we do?" Because now, some of the things that we did that were different than what other places do, and I think were really effective. You weren't part of this because this is in the later cohorts, but we started like, we put people into a group of peers that they could get feedback on their ideas from. We created what we called the Top Hooker Challenge, where it was actually a gamified thing where you could share your hooks for your posts. 'Cause of course, the hook has so much impact on whether somebody reads, and you could share yours and get feedback on them from other smart people and give feedback. And there was prizes. So the more feedback you gave, the more points you got, the more feedback you got, the better you got. And what people started to see, it started to build their confidence because while they would toil over their own hook for days, right? They'd be like writing in their head, be like, that's not good. They could immediately give feedback to somebody else and be able to help them get clarity on their thing because it was so much easier. And so all of this has led me to answer your question this roundabout way. There's this great story from how Pixar became what Pixar is and how they helped to reinvigorate Disney. And what they did, do you know this story? It's written in the book Creative, what's the name of the book? Um,
That
Creative
book
Inc.
about
I think.
Pixar.
Yeah,
Oh,
and so
mm.
what they did was what they realized was that a lot of the best ideas were getting killed before they ever had a chance to get developed because they would get shot down, somebody wouldn't fully understand them, and so these great creative ideas didn't even have a chance because they were too precious, they were too vulnerable to criticism, and so they would just get killed, and so they created something called the Brain Trust, which was a group of trusted peers who would give candid and rigorous feedback on films as they were developing. And those people were not allowed to necessarily stop the thing from going forward. The director still had the final say. But what it created was this environment where you could float out what sounded like a crazy, shitty idea, and people would sit with it and they'd talk about it and they'd work on it together. And that's what made Pixar put out hit after hit after hit. And then they brought it to Disney, and Disney had been doing like a decade of shitty films, and they produced Frozen, which was like their biggest breakthrough in like a decade. And so I think that ideas are these precious things. And part of the work that we need to be able to do is to help people believe that they have them, because if they don't believe it,
Mm.
then they're already dead in the water, and help them to nurture them and feel confident in them, and that's something that I don't see that existing in the market being done well when it comes to this stuff. So I'm thinking about that for us because I think that there are people like you and me that just naturally like to think a lot. We like to poke holes in things. We like to be contrarian. Those people, it'll be easier for. But I still think there are people who don't default to that personality, who fear questioning authority, who have brilliant ideas locked in their head that can change the world and change their lives. And I want to figure out how we can pull those out. And I feel like it's probably in the realm of building a confidence factory or a conviction factory. And I don't know exactly what that looks like in practice yet, but I want to figure it out.
It's a really, really interesting angle on it that I'd never considered. Like, the way that I guess I sort of look at it when I look at other people in our kind of sphere is that just because you do something all the time doesn't necessarily mean that you think about that thing. Sometimes
Mhm.
you're just doing the thing, and you're a kind of best practice merchant. And I sort of figured, well, that's that's just how, that's just how some people are, sort of personality wise. And there is an element of that. But I guess it never occurred to me that confidence was a factor that contributed to that. So I suppose it does then beg the obvious question, and in a very sort of basic podcast potted way, if I am an expert in something, what is the sort of hack to figuring out, oh, that might be my ownable idea?
hmm So I've been thinking a lot about this because as I work with clients, and I'm doing work with clients in batches. So I do a batch and I learn from it and I figure out what's working, and then we're on our second batch now. And so I've been able to break it down to this kind of like step process for finding your ownable idea. Now, one thing that I talk about a lot is like you can have like a very distinctive point of view on how to do the work, and a lot of people do. If you show them kind of like the category cliches in their space, you show them common assumptions, you show them what their competitors are saying, they will respond in visceral ways. What we do, and part of the work, is then taking that response and then mapping that back to what people want to hear, because those two things have to go together. You need to say something different that people don't know they need to hear. And so how do you do that? How do you
Mm.
systematically do that? And how can we do it predictably? Because again, if I want to build this company and it works, we need to figure out how to help people do this predictably. And so I've broken it down to kind of like 5 questions, and this is inspired by April Dunford's original, 5-question framework for finding your positioning. But these are the 5 questions, they all build on each other, and what's fascinating about this is that depending on how you answer the question, the whole trail that comes after of logic changes. So most
Yes.
people have 100 different ways they could express their idea, and how they express it is gonna be what matters, whether it becomes ownable and whether it spreads. So the 5 questions are, the first one's like aspiration, like what does your buyer deeply want? Because that matters, right? If you've got an idea that doesn't attract the type of person you want to work with, and it doesn't actually show them how they're going to get something that they want, you're screwed. Next one is the problem. So what's the real problem that's stopping them from achieving their aspiration that they're going to pay you to solve, right? Find a lot of people will they'll have a hot take about something, and that hot take they think is like the same as an ownable idea, but it's not something people would solve. You can hate like marketing bros as much as you want. That can be a hot take, and people can associate you with the hater marketing bros. That's not gonna bring you business, right?
Yeah,
And so
sure,
it's got to
sure.
come back to something that they're willing to pay to solve. The lens, like, so what does your experience let you see that others miss on that problem, right? Like, and why trust you? Because again, this is the piece where I think it falls down. There's people who can have
Hmm.
strong opinions and they can be valid, but if they don't have a earned lens and we don't believe that they can give us the answer, then we're going to ignore them. Then the revelation, right? So what's the hidden truth that once known unframes, like reframes everything? This one is the hardest one to get because it needs to be like for an ownable idea to spread, it can't just be obvious, right? There's lots of good ideas that are obvious. They're so obvious they become cliches. And so it's like it needs to have novelty. And most people, they don't push for that. They push for safe. They push for it sounds like what somebody else is saying with this little twist, but it's not enough for people to perk and go, oh, that's different. And then what must people do or believe differently after they hear it? So that's like the directive. Like it has to tell people to
That's
do something.
interesting.
So those are the 5 that I figured out. And then the directive ultimately takes people back to their goal. The way that people answer these questions, it's going to completely change where they get to with their answer. And so I think that that's part of the work, right? It's like, but I see an ownable idea. The more work that I've done on this is like, because initially to me, it was just kind of like obvious after I started thinking about it that this is the thing. This is the 80/20. You get this right, you can do a lot of other shit wrong and you'll still find success. And when you don't have this, you can execute flawlessly in content and it's still not going to work. And so like, I was like, if this is the 80/20, why are so few people figuring it out? And like, that's an interesting problem to solve. And I'm hopeful that we can solve that for people because as I do the work with my clients, there's times where it just becomes clear to me. It's like, okay, this direction isn't going to work. This one is. And then I need to kind of reverse engineer my thinking of why. Why was it clear to me? So with one of the clients that I just delivered, we give them 2 directions to choose from. We pull a bunch of their ideas out of them, and these are their beliefs, and then what we do is we figure out how do we map these back to what the market needs to hear, and that usually leads to it's how the thing gets compressed into something, and it leads to, like, 2 versions of a central argument that they might be able to make, and I presented back to this client, and she was so excited, she's like, "This is what I've been saying, but nobody gave a shit," and the reason nobody gave a shit was because she wasn't framing the problem right. She was leading with the answer, not creating the problem that people cared about, and so it's like, that's where people get stuck. It's like the thing's there. The unique thing is there. They haven't figured out how to frame it in a way that makes people care. And that's the work, right?
Well, then, okay, so I'm going to take this opportunity to obviously educate the listener, but moreover, get free advice from you. So
Yeah.
I'm going to throw my most recent sort of hypothesis at you. It's
Mhm.
obviously not framed as an ownable idea, and then let's see if you can critique it through the lens
Mhm.
of the ownable idea, so I can really
Mhm.
grasp these pieces that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to spend like hours on it. I'll just like 30 seconds.
Mhm.
The main thing that I'm sort of looking at the moment is how the increased ease of execution and obviously the democratization of information with AI
Yeah.
is leading to conditions of what I'm calling hyper competition, hyper
Yeah.
abundance and hyper competition. And I think that everybody's feeling this, even if they haven't put a name to it, that just like
Mhm.
the intensity in every field is growing, and the ability to actually kind of like stand out and get leads is going down and down, down and down all the time, because there's just so much stuff now, such a condition of oversupply. So
Mhm.
then, how do you break through this? Because the problem is, if you all of the normal things that people were doing in the past, doing good positioning, like sensible
Mhm.
sort of sales scripts and like product development, all this like good stuff that was enough in the past, now everybody can do. So
Mhm.
the level of what you need to do in order to succeed raises.
Mhm.
And it's gone up one click from where it was even like 2-3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And the way that I see it is that like essentially like uh for a business now to be able to kind of like attract necessary attention in its market to get cut through, not just a solo business but any type of business, it needs to be doing something that is sufficiently interesting that it gravitates attention to it from potential hires, potential investors, potential customers. So the strategy that the business is employing, it doesn't just need to be effective. Effective strategy isn't enough anymore. I think about it that the strategy actually has to be charismatic.
Okay.
It has to make people notice. The strategy itself has to be the attention grabbing asset. So I'm sort of
Mhm.
toying with this as this idea of charismatic strategy to be distinct from
Mhm.
just strategy that's focused on working. So
Mhm.
within that like rough thesis that I've like spelt out there, is there an ownable idea in there?
100%. When I remember reading a email that you sent where you started sharing this thesis, and I was just, like, nodding. I think I emailed you and said, like, "This is so good." Um, what stood out to me in that, and I this is changing the way that I'm building Unignorable. So this is the thing, like, does it actually if you know an ownable idea is good, if when someone hears it, it changes the way they think and they know what action to take. You said something in that email and I love the charismatic business. I think that that's like, Cody Sanchez coined boring business. I think charismatic business is really good.
I hadn't drawn
Um,
that parallel. That's good.
but you said something that I thought was so like it was like do what is hard and do what is rare. Because I think right now there's this land grab happening and people are thinking, "Oh, it's easier than ever to build a business, so I'm gonna do the thing that's easy." Like, you know how many people right now are running creating like productized service businesses doing content, right? Well, guess what? That's easy. It's easy because everyone has the same AI army behind them. And so the idea of like the way to be to insulate yourself from obliteration is to actually choose to do the hard thing, the rare thing, the thing that people aren't doing because it's hard. I remember when you said that, I was like, it solidified my belief that what we were doing with Unignorable, with ownable ideas, was the right strategy because it is hard. It's way fucking harder than other things I could be doing.
It's very
I
hard,
could
yeah.
run a a cohort on helping people to build their personal brands, and there'd be a lot of them out there. And yeah, we could it might be similar to the ones that are out there. I could start a community, and lots of people are doing that because I have a big following, because people trust me, because I deliver value. I'm sure I could build a business there. Would that business be sustainable long term? Would that business insulate
Mm,
me from the many, many, many people who have that exact same ideas and are executing it because it's easy? So to me, what stood out, like I love the idea of the charismatic business, but what stood out to me more in your idea when you shared this was the directive of if everyone else is going to play the game, then you need to play it on hard mode to win. And you need to make a conscious choice to do that, to do the hard thing. But then the idea of the way that you do the hard thing and the way that you get people to care about the hard thing is through the charisma, through the magic. Like that stuck out to me right away. It got me thinking about how I was going to build my business. It made me feel confident that I should do this because I was like, yeah, it's really fucking hard. And that's why other people aren't going to do it. Like, one-to-one done with you is a lot harder than me putting out a self-guided course, right? It's way harder. But do I think I'll be actually able to get more outcomes for people because of it? Yes. Do I think that if I work hard enough, I'll be able to build enough um, systemization into the back end that we can do things much more efficiently than we could have if I didn't really invest in this being the thing? Yes. Does that mean that other people are going to be able to compete? No, because they're not going to be able to have that efficiency built into the business. They're not going to put the time in to actually build the infrastructure required to be able to do this work and make it really profitable because they won't, if it's a passing thing, they won't do it. So that was what stood out for me from the idea of the charismatic business. But it's kind of like there's almost two ideas there, but like the idea around the thing that you need to be willing to do something that's harder and and you need to do the rare thing. And the way that you get people to care is the charismatic business. There's a whole argument there. Um, I think those ideas could be combined into one. To
mm,
me, there's also probably enough for them to both stand as individual arguments, and you might succeed more in leaning into one. But I think that for a lot of people who wanna start businesses right now or who want to insulate themselves, like, the pain point is real. I hadn't heard anybody else frame it that way, and as soon as I did, I was like, "Yeah." And that's what you want. That's when you know the revelation's there.
yeah. Well, that's very helpful. And actually, the one way I often think about it, I don't know if this is something you think about with your clients, but I found it to be, well, it's not at all easy. It's very difficult, but it's like I think it's important. Is that sometimes you've got to have a division between what your content is about on a
Uh-huh,
macro and then
uh-huh,
what you sell on a micro. So, I mean,
uh-huh,
I'm not sure that to give an example using what we're talking about, like, I could write broad content where the spirit of the content is do what's hard, do what's rare, but that could apply
mhm,
to all sorts of domains, but it's got broad
uh-huh,
reach to bring people in
uh-huh,
top of funnel.
mhm.
But then the actual product is the
Is the
charismatic
charisma.
strategy for the charismatic
Yes.
business, right?
Yes,
Uh,
right?
and so that I think that could always be a really cool way for people who, if what their business is about, if it's very sort of idea driven, to actually,
Mhm.
because it's very hard to have a content theme and a product that are exactly the same, because normally the product is going to be much narrower than you want the content to be.
The product is the solution. The
Right.
content theme is the idea. And so I
Right.
absolutely, 'cause
Okay. Cool.
this is
Yeah.
the thing. So, so going back to this client that I just delivered her strategy, like she wanted to sell this thing that there's no market demand for, but it's absolutely necessary. But because there's no it's a new thing, it's a new category, it solves a real problem. The reality is that the problem that she solves is so big that people are literally there's literally a tons of stats to show that people are dying because they're not doing things, they're not solving this problem in the right way. And so my approach was like, okay, well, we need to actually raise the stakes of inaction or the solutions that people are using right now. And so we need to lead with a hyper like stake driven message, which then creates the demand for her new category of thing. It makes it the natural de facto solution. I think that that's what you're doing. Like you're basically saying you're coming with this like incredible idea around doing the hard and rare thing, and then the how is the charismatic business. I like that because the difference between a good idea and an ownable idea in my perspective is whether or not you're willing to keep repeating it. Because I've realized the actual element that makes something ownable, it's not surfacing the great thing. Like that is the first step. The extraction, the finding, like that's the first step. It's shaping it into something that travels, that compressing it into something that can like be in a room when you're not. That's hard. A lot of people need help with that. And actually sharing it on repeat so that people start to associate with you, not everybody, but the people who are your best fit customers, that's where the battle is won and lost. You need to say that I have enough conviction in this being true. I think I could build a body of work around this being true. I think the answer is the charismatic business. I'm gonna commit to that. Like, and that commitment, that conviction is what a lot of people never do, which is why they don't actually break through. They come up with something good. There are people who go through Unignorable because you might remember this, but like the last exercise in Unignorable was you had to come up with like what are your big ideas. And like have some of the people who went through and they did the pro version where we did calls and stuff, like, we would talk about, like, their big ideas, and this one girl came up with this amazing one. I was like, "Oh, damn, that's really good," and, like, she ended up putting it in her LinkedIn profile. She created a post about it. That post went viral. She created a couple more posts, and then she kinda shied back from it and started talking about other stuff, and I was like, "Well, that's not gonna work." Like, there's gotta be that level of commitment.
That's a fantastic point, and it's funny because obviously your ownable idea at the moment is the ownable idea. And when I first saw you put it out there, and this really says it all, my first reaction was like, I can't believe that somebody else doesn't already own this, but certainly I can't think of anyone who does. And I must
It
have heard the words ownable
Mhm,
idea before. Those two words
mhm.
have been put together before. But as you say, there's like a
Absolutely.
there's a big difference between have the words been put together before and who actually owns it.
Mhm,
And if nobody has actually taken ownership of that thing, then well, frankly, even if you didn't come up with it, you can actually still take ownership of it. So yeah, it's a
mhm.
very important distinction that
Justin
I
Welsh didn't
I
coin the
like a
term
lot.
solopreneur,
I
but he did
always wondered that. I always
he did
wondered
it.
that.
Somebody who went through Unignorable, who put in like, I remember having a conversation with her, she coined that word.
No.
She put herself as, in her LinkedIn profile, she says the OG solopreneur, but the difference of what she did and what Justin did is meaningful because what Justin did and what the charismatic business must do and what somebody must do if they wanna have an ownable idea is Justin framed the story around he made solopreneurship heroic, he made it aspirational, right?
Yes.
Because before, I remember running my first agency, I was a freelancer, I was a solopreneur, I didn't that term wasn't in my vocabulary then, but I remember having a bunch of faces of my team who were actually just other freelancers that I would work with on my site because it was embarrassing to be a
Mm.
solopreneur. It made you feel small. It felt like it was admitting that your business wasn't that meaningful or trustworthy. And Justin came
Yeah.
along and said, "No, this is actually an alternative lifestyle. It's for the people who could crush it in their 9 to 5s, who are rising the executive levels, who could go off and build the next VC-backed startup, but they don't want to because they value freedom more. They see this new path and they see this new opportunity." He romanticized it and created a true, like, cult following around the idea. I bought into that idea for a long time, and, I would say this to Justin to his face, like, I don't want to be a solopreneur. I realized that in the journey. It sounded great. The reality for me is I want a team. I wanna build a real co
Yeah.
not a real company 'cause that's not fair, but I wanna build a
I know
business
what you mean. I know
that
what you mean. Yeah.
isn't Caitlin. But I totally was completely wrapped up in the idea for several years until the realities of it became quite obvious, and I said, "This isn't what I want."
That is awesome. That is awesome. And I had, like I say, I'd always wondered, did he invent it? And now I know. So listen, I think there's going to be a lot of people who, for sure, listening to this, who are like, right, right, right. I need my ownable idea. Basically, well, any solo-ish type person is pretty much in that bucket. So, uh, for those people, is there a way that they can find you?
Yeah. So go to ownableidea.com. I was
Oh,
able to get the
you even
domain,
got
which
the .com. How the hell did you get that?
it just shows to show you. Lots of people talked about it. Nobody tried to own it. But you're
That's
actually going to get to
crazy.
you're going to go, you'll land on a opt-in page for our newsletter, Unignorable. And that's where you'll get on our list. Right now, like I said, I'm only taking in clients in
Hmm.
batches. And so I'm booking. Probably next batch will be in June. And when I open up spots, I'll let people know about it. But that's the way to work with me one-on-one. But if you get on the newsletter, then you'll see we do breakdowns on amazing idea owners and how they did it and kind of the psychology behind it. So join the newsletter and follow me on LinkedIn, and that's where you'll find out if there's an opportunity to continue working together.
Terrific, terrific. I'll have to check that out myself. Thanks a lot, Katelyn. Great to
Thanks,
chat.
Alex. Great to chat.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you want to keep expanding the way that you think and the results that you get, then make sure you hit subscribe here. And also check out basicarts.org/raremind, where you can subscribe to my Substack, which features deep essays on these topics, deep practical essays, and fundamentally is all about how businesses can win in this crazy post-AI world.